I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. It's the day after Election Day, and lots to talk about. We'll look at what the results mean for you. Plus, he may one day be a saint. We'll meet this Vietnamese Cardinal through the eyes of his sister.
He always tells us to look things in a positive way.
And a day to pray for all souls.
Having a chance to pray as a community always brings some relief.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Francesca Maxime has the night off. Well, the dust is still settling, the results still being deciphered, but it is clear election 2010 was one for the record books. On Capitol Hill, it resulted in the biggest turnover in the House of Representatives in 70 years, with the GOP picking up 60 seats. And with that, it appears the next Speaker of the House will be John Boehner from Ohio, becoming the first Catholic Republican to hold the post. He would succeed another Catholic, Nancy Pelosi, who herself made history as the first woman to hold the job. Republicans also won 6 Senate seats, but Democrats still managed to hold on to the majority there. Well, meanwhile, it was a clean sweep for Democrats here in New York. They won the 5 statewide offices that were up for grabs. Democrat Andrew Cuomo took more than 61% of the vote in the governor's race, defeating Buffalo businessman Carl Palladino. Democrats also won the races for Attorney General, Comptroller, and both U.S. Senate seats. Well, to talk about this and much more, we're joined now by John Heyer. He's the executive director of the Catholic Citizens Committee here in Brooklyn. John, thanks again for being here. We appreciate it very much.
Very interesting times we have.
Get used to hanging out with you here.
Yeah,
You'll have to become a regular on the show. But of course, last night, as I've already mentioned, one for the record books. It was a big night for Republicans. Just first of all, kind of your general reaction to the big picture from last night.
The big picture from last night really told us a lot of things. I think really first and foremost, the president spoke at 1 o'clock this afternoon, and he was right about saying that people were voting about the economy. Really, when it comes down to it, people are looking at jobs, looking at the loss of their homes, and that's a very big priority. I also, though, don't agree with the president in saying that I think it was also about some of his other policy issues. Healthcare or Obamacare, however you want to put it, as well as some of the other things that the Democratic president with the Democratic House and Senate have been able to push forward in the last 2 years. So I think it's really been a combination of all of that, and we've seen a great rejection of it. Now, many people are saying, well, it's, this is a movement for the Republicans. I see it less as a movement for the Republicans and more as a rejection of what has happened in the last 2 years.
Right, a rejection of things in Washington, generally speaking. I mean, people, the exit polls showed and polling even before the election showed that people just weren't happy with the way things were going in Washington. A lot of the political discourse and everything like that between the parties as well.
Absolutely.
As we mentioned, John Boehner is going to be presumably the next Speaker of the House. He would be the first Catholic Republican to hold that post. And I was actually, a headline caught my eye this morning. It was actually in Catholic Online. It says, "Real Catholic Speaker of the House," talking about John Boehner and his pro-life stance and saying that, he understands church teaching and all of that. And this kind of goes back to something we were talking about yesterday with that sort of stance being what a lot of people vote on. But then also you look at a lot of other issues that John Boehner espouses about the death penalty. He's very pro-death penalty. He's voted in favor of making death penalty appeals harder and that sort of thing. So is it kind of a mixed bag there for Catholics, you think?
It is a mixed bag. Goes like you're saying, Boehner, Catholic, went to Jesuit University, and he's definitely Catholic, but of course, just like all people, he does have his own opinions when it comes to things. Is he much more Catholic than Nancy Pelosi? Some would argue yes, and I think that's what they're referring to there and saying, a quote-unquote real Catholic speaker.
Definitely a changing of the guard.
Changing of the guard.
Yeah.
The important part is, first of all, is that it is still a Catholic, I guess you could say, from the Catholic perspective, and it's really a great time because I think he'll be able to advance a lot of the other Catholic issues that have been neglected in the past. We heard from Cardinal Burke say, again, that life is really the most important issue that we as Catholics need to gauge when deciding who to vote for. And so he's obviously on the right par and track when it comes to life as far as it comes to, conception and abortion. But it remains to be seen what else, will come from the rest of his views. I think it's very important that Ohio, just in general as a state, has gone this direction. As we know, Ohio, as well as swing states like Pennsylvania, are very important to the presidential elections and the lead-ups to that point. Both of which, Ohio and Pennsylvania, are majority Catholic. 24% of people in Ohio are Catholic. 52% of people in Pennsylvania are Catholic.
Right.
And so this shows that two swing states that are Catholic are now turning more towards candidates that represent life, as we saw in the congressional elections in Pennsylvania, and we see in congressional elections in Ohio.
Right, and the governor's race there as well, with John Kasich being elected governor. Also, last night it wasn't completely entirely bad news for the Democrats. I mean, they did still manage to hold on to control of the Senate, so that control lost seats, but they will retain control. Here in New York, it was generally good news, as I mentioned there, in statewide races for the Democrats. But also, we were talking before we went on the air about a local race that flipped. There was a race on Staten Island we were talking about.
Staten Island, New York City traditionally had all Democratic congressional members. There was one seat, the seat in Staten Island, that shares Staten Island and Bay Ridge, that has gone Republican back and forth. Recently held and currently held by Congressman McMahon, has now, as of last night, been turned over and went back Republican to Michael Grimm. So that was actually a big turning point. And if we just look at that seat, that local seat, and say, why did this happen? Mike McMahon actually voted against the health care plan of the Obama administration. Yet it seems that he was still punished for, or quote-unquote punished, not reelected, for being part of the status quo, the Democratic, machine that was there. So it's interesting to see that, whereas on the opposite side of things, we look at areas in Queens where we had people like Republican Frank Padovan be ousted by, Tony Avella, the Democrat. Same thing, Anthony Cuomo, running for the Senate in Queens, was ousted by Joseph Adabo. Yeah. So, there's no rhyme and reason sometimes other than local issues. How does it affect me? And I really tend to think when it comes to New York City, more times than not, it's about the economy. I believe it was about the economy in Staten Island, and it's also about the economy over in Queens.
There you go. Well, all politics is local, as they say. John Heyer, thank you so much for being here once again. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents coming up straight ahead. The deadly attacks on Iraqi Christians may be far from over. We'll have the latest on that, along with the rest of the day's headlines, next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, we'll have a look at a man who may one day be a saint through the eyes of someone who knew him very well. But first, let's take a look at the day's headlines. Well, there's more reaction to the deadly attack on a church in Baghdad over the weekend. The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference says the United States should not abandon defenseless Iraqis. In a statement, Cardinal Francis George said the U.S. failed to help Iraqis in finding the political will and concrete ways needed to help protect the lives of all citizens, especially Christians and other minorities. The Cardinal also said American bishops are praying for the victims, their families, and all Christians in Iraq. Meantime, the terrorist organization, the Islamic State of Iraq, is threatening more attacks on Christians there. Sunday's siege of a Catholic church in Baghdad, which you're seeing here, left 58 people dead, at least 75 others wounded. Now, the al-Qaeda-linked group that claimed responsibility says there will be more attacks unless Christians in Egypt's Coptic church release women in their custody. The terrorist group says the women are being held against their will for converting to Christianity. Well, meantime, leaders from the Christian and Muslim faiths are gathering in Geneva this week to talk about how to build strong, lasting relations. The event is called Transforming Communities, Christians and Muslims Building a Common Future. Organizers say the talks will also focus on tearing down divisions between different groups, transforming communities through religious resources, and finding ways to prevent crises and address challenges together. As the talks began, Jordan's Prince Ghazi told leaders that the persecution of religious minorities is evil, absolutely forbidden, and ultimately a rejection of God's love. Well, in Belgium, the spokesman for the Archbishop of Brussels has resigned, saying he can no longer speak for someone he considers to be a loose cannon. Archbishop André Leonard has come under fire for statements he made about homosexuals and priests accused of sex abuse. Archbishop Leonard reportedly suggested that AIDS could be seen as imminent justice for people engaging in homosexual acts. Last week, he also said that it would do no good to punish elderly retired priests accused of sexual abuse. Well, back here in this country now, U.S. bishops will meet later this month in Baltimore for their fall assembly. But don't expect any blockbuster agenda items this year. Reports say the meetings will focus mainly on internal matters such as budget issues and how to better integrate new media into their ministries. And finally, Pope Benedict took some time out on Tuesday to pray for those who went before him. It's tradition on All Souls Day for the pontiff to go to the grottos of the Vatican Basilica to pray for the popes buried there. Benedict XVI stopped for prayer at the tomb of Benedict XV, and that was the pope who inspired him to take the same name. He also stopped at the tombs of Pius XI, Pius XII, and John Paul II, among others. Well, coming up a little bit later on in the show, we'll show you how the leader of the church here in Brooklyn marked All Souls Day. But stay tuned, there's more currents coming up after the break. Just ahead, through dark days in prison, he kept his faith. Now, this modern-day Vietnamese cardinal may move closer to sainthood. Welcome back. Well, last week it was announced that the Vatican was formally opening the canonization process for Vietnamese Cardinal Francois Xavier Van Thuan. Van Thuan was the Archbishop of Saigon and was arrested by the communist government shortly after the city fell in 1975. Charged with, quote, having plotted with the Vatican and the imperialists against the communist revolution, unquote, he spent 13 years in prison, 9 of them in solitary confinement, before finally being freed and then leaving the country. Cardinal Van Thuan died in Rome in 2002. But his legacy lives on, as Rome Reports discovered recently during an interview with the late cardinal's sister.
Tien Therese is one of 7 siblings of Vietnamese Cardinal Van Thuan, whose life and legacy continue to serve as a beacon of hope in his native country. The late cardinal's case is currently being considered for beatification. Tien reminisces about birthday parties, family reunions, and travels.
In the family, I never seen him angry with us. Even if we say things wrong or we criticize him, he always find the way to tell us to look things in a positive way, to be kind to people.
Francois Xavier Van Thuan was a nature lover. When he was named cardinal, he brought a bonsai tree with him to the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. His other main hobby was cooking. His specialty was cooking with vegetables and fish.
He loves cooking also. He loves, sometimes he has time, he loves to cook for my brother, for my mother. He cooks just simple porridge, I think. Cooks for his, seminarian. Yes, and cooks for invite people to come.
But those happy days ended when Monsignor Van Thuan was arrested by the Viet Cong months after being appointed Bishop of Saigon. His family was forced to flee the country, and his sister Tien moved with some of the family members to Australia. During the 13 years that her brother was in prison, 9 of which were in solitary confinement, they received little news of his condition.
Sometimes, 2 times, some organization like charity or Caritas, they came to visit Vietnam and gave all the gifts like medicine, food, and then they asked to see if my brother is still alive. And that person was able to talk to him.
But when they did receive news on Van Thuan, his mother and the rest of his family gathered to pray the rosary and thank God that he was safe. On November 21, 1988, the long-awaited news of his release finally arrived. Francois Xavier called one of his sisters to tell her the day he'd be released.
My sister said to my parents, today a bishop came to visit you. And my parents dressed up and then my brother knocked at the door and came in, and my mother was so happy, and my father couldn't speak.
Tien Therese keeps the shoes her brother wore while he was in prison, but the most meaningful memento she keeps is his enduring optimism and his inextinguishable will in fighting for justice.
Well, stay with us. There's much more currents still to come. When we return, remembering Brooklyn's faithful departed. We'll take you to an All Souls Day Mass.
May the souls of the faithful departed, to the mercy of God, abide in peace. Amen.
As I mentioned earlier on in the show, yesterday marked All Souls Day, and many Catholics use the occasion to visit cemeteries and remember and pray for loved ones who have passed away. Bishop DiMarzio made a visit of his own to St. John's Cemetery in Queens, where he blessed and dedicated a new mausoleum.
Today we celebrate All Souls Day, a day in which we remember all of our faithful departed. We're here in St. John's Cemetery, where we will celebrate a field mass. Every year we do this. This year we also will bless a new mausoleum that has just been completed. We respect the dead. It's one of the corporal works of mercy that we bury the dead, and we bury them with as much care that we can, because we respect the human body. It's been baptized. It's been made part of the body of Christ.
The souls of the just are in the hand of God, and no torment shall touch them. Chastised a little, they shall be greatly blessed, because God tried them and found them worthy of himself.
You remember your deceased, and I have a chance to remember my brother. Having a chance to pray as a community always brings some relief.
We think about our loved ones in everyday activities, but especially during the holidays and during days like this, we tend to stay a little closer by prayer and just to be united with family members.
God has prepared for those who love him something much better, something beyond our imagining. The souls of the just are at peace. Each one of us today does reflect on death. We cannot help it. We are in this place for that purpose. We must live our lives day in and day out in the hope and the promise of the resurrection, and in trying to do the good that is available and possible to us.
I've been coming here since I'm a little girl. My grandparents are here on both sides, my mother's, my father's. My husband was recently buried here in 2001. I just feel better coming here to pray for all souls.
We try to provide a place of faith, hope, and comfort for our Catholic families at our Catholic cemeteries. We have 10 cemeteries in the diocese. They encompass over 1,000 acres of land between Brooklyn and Queens, and we also have St. Charles Cemetery in Long Island and Farmingdale, and that cemetery alone is almost 500 acres. It is quite a challenge to maintain the cemeteries, because we believe that they have to be maintained as places of beauty and as sacred places to honor those who have gone before us.
A common Christian concern has brought us together to bless this mausoleum, where our bodies and the bodies of others sealed with the name of Christ will lie at rest, awaiting the dawn of the Lord's coming in glory.
Many families want a sheltered environment. It's a very reverent setting. There's stained glass, statuary, and so on. And there's a comfort, a quietness that allows them to pray for their loved ones and reflect.
May the souls of the faithful departed, to the mercy of God, abide in peace. Amen.
Well, it is, of course, yesterday was All Souls Day there, and a time when I can't help but think, of course, my loved ones who've passed on. And my grandmother especially, she lived with my family actually for the first several years of my life until she passed away when I was 12 or 13 years old. And had such an impact on my life. And it's so nice to know now that we can think about and pray about our loved ones who, like my grandmother and my other relatives, had such a great impact on our lives on a day like All Souls Day and on the holidays and all of that. And just remember the times that we shared, the times that we laughed and cried together, and the huge impact that they had on our lives. It's a great, great time. Well, that is it for tonight. Now remember, we're always online over at currentsny.net. You can also find us on Facebook and on Twitter as well. Now, if you have a story idea, want to send us a message about exactly what that idea might be, drop us a line. The email address is dropusaline@currentsny.net. Until next time, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night.